Alright guys, so welcome to part 2 of the Omega 551 teardown and rebuild. In this video we're going to go through the teardown and rebuild process. Alright, so we now have the watch out of the cleaner. The watch has been ultrasonically cleaned, and then it's gone through its single stage cleaning with a 3-stage rinse and then a heating cycle as well. So what we're going to do now is we're going to get to assembling and lubricating the watch as we go. So when it comes to assembly, I like to do one thing first, and that is I like to fit the mainspring into the barrel. This is a new Omega 550 mainspring that we're going to insert into the barrel. Couple of other things that we can talk about. We have a new center wheel with the correct bushing installed that we're going to install in there. And I haven't got it out, but we're going to put a new friction spring on our center seconds pinion there. So we're going to do that. And yeah, we'll get started. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to get started on assembling that and lubricating that barrel. All right, so I've got the barrel lubricated and we're ready to install the mainspring. So I've taken the mainspring out of the packaging, and we're going to pop the mainspring in. Now it's important we lubricate the sides of the barrel walls because we need that slipping action. So we need it to slip, but we also need it to grip, because if it slips too much, we get what's called a clunker, and then it slips around and loses a bunch of power reserve. So we need it to slip just the right amount. So we've greased up the wall. Now we don't need to grease the barrel itself. We're using a brand new pre-lubricated mainspring, so there's absolutely no need to grease the barrel itself. So we're going to go ahead and we put the ring over the mainspring like so, and we'll take our plastic peg and we'll push in our mainspring. We'll do one side, and we'll do the other. And our spring's in. So now we get our trusty barrel closing tool. Barrel closing tool is pretty simple. Has a lid, cover, and you just pop it on like so. There's a hole specifically designed for the barrel arbor to go into. Now we're going to lubricate where our barrel arbor goes. That's really important because our barrel arbor is what's spinning inside the barrel and actually allowing the watch to run. So it's really important that we lubricate the flat surface and then the side surface too, because if we don't lubricate those two surfaces, sorry, I couldn't do that on camera, we're going to have friction there, and then we're going to have an amplitude loss when it comes to that. And we don't want that. We want amplitude to be nice and strong. And then we can lubricate our top surfaces too. For this, we just use a bit of HP 1300. That's Swiss-made lubricant. It's a fully synthetic lubricant, and it's for slow-moving parts and components. So what we also want to do is we want to close up our end shake on our barrel lid. End shake's really important on our barrel. We don't want it to be sloppy. So we'll just put our plastic peg in there. We'll press down. And we close up our end shake like that. And then we put our cover. It's actually called a barrel cover, not a lid. I have a watchmaker friend who goes crazy every time I call it a lid. We center up our barrel. Nice snap means our barrel is closed. Now what we have to do is we have to check our end shake. Now our end shake is non-existent at that point. But that's not a bad thing, because what we can do now, we press on the reverse side of the barrel, on the part where the ratchet wheel goes, and we open up and we push out our lid, and that's going to open up and give us our end shake. And we can now control exactly how much end shake we have. And what we do is we put this back on just to make sure our lid is closed. We don't want to push the lid out. And here we have minimal barrel end shake. We also have minimal side shake because we don't want sloppy side shake, because if we have sloppy side shake, it's going to cause issues. We want minimal end shake. Check it in a few positions. I do this by feel generally. And there we go. Our barrel is assembled and ready to install in our movement. So now we want to lubricate our insettings, our shock protection for our balance. Some people pre-assemble these and use an automatic oiler. I've never been a fan of that. I have an automatic oiler somewhere. I've never use it. I prefer the old school method of lubricating them with 90-10 and placing the insetting on top. We'll do the same thing again. Well, using 90-10 is an old school, because you would use (90-10) in an automatic oiler as well, but let's get this hair out of there. Okay. I know some watchmakers that use automatic oilers for absolutely everything, but it's something I've never been able to get on board with. I've never liked them. Maybe if you're a watchmaker, you can tell me if in the comments section if you use them. I've never been able to get on board. So we put our settings in place, and then we can close up our shock protection springs. Now the 550 has a bit of a different style. Of shock protection spring. For the other side, it doesn't have your original Inca block spring. It has this spring that we see here that sits in a setting. It's just a different style. It works totally fine. It's a good system, but it's just different. So we'll install that now. So we'll put the setting, try not to drop it. See how that whole setting comes out there? We'll put the setting in place. A bit of a trick for picking these up. I like to use some fresh Rodico just to pick it up like that. I don't like using Rodico on the clean movement, but just to pick up the spring like that, and it saves us fumbling around. Drop it in place. And then we drop the screw in place. Like so. Now, it's really important at this point that we check our balance. We need to make sure that our balance is flat. We need to make sure that it's concentric and that it's breathing between the curb pins correctly. So what do we need to look at? Well, I'm going to check to see now, it looks pretty good. We took a look, you'll remember, before cleaning, and it looked pretty good. But let's head over to the microscope so we can have a closer look. So this is pretty tough to capture on my style of microscope, but as far as concentricity goes, we're looking pretty good. Maybe a small adjustment to make to bring it in from the back, but generally we're looking pretty good. Now let's see what we're looking like between the curb pins. So this is kind of tough to capture on camera, but our curb pins are as close together as they can be while still breathing. It's important to keep our curb pins close together because if they're wide apart, we can have a big amplitude loss in the vertical positions. But that is breathing nicely. You'll just have to take my word for it. Yeah, so we're all good with our curb pins. Our curb pins are so important because they control timekeeping. They can make basically the watch faster or slower by controlling the active length of the balance spring. So now that our balance is good, we can get to work on assembling and lubricating the movement. So here's our gear train. This is how it works. We have our barrel, center wheel, third wheel, fourth wheel, escape wheel, pallet fork, and balance. And this is basically how our power gets transferred through the gear train to the balance. Now, before we install our gear train and barrel, there's something important that we need to do. We need to use a product called EpiLam. Now, EpiLam is a surface treatment, and what this surface treatment does is it stops the creep of lubrication. So we are going to EpiLam these components here, our escapement, and excuse me, this is kind of the jar EpiLam comes in. We put it in there and then we use heat to make sure that it's dry because we can form condensation and there has been rust known to form on parts with EpiLam. So I'm going to get those EpiLammed and we can go ahead and install our train. Okay, so we have our parts that are EpiLammed and then they've been dried on the heater. I actually forgot to mention I added one part afterwards. The seconds pinion friction spring needs to get lubricated on the bushing side. Seconds pinion. On the Rolex 1570, we don't lubricate these pinions at all. They go in completely dry. But with the Omega 550, a little bit of light lubricant, 9010, just on that bushing side is good practice. So let's go ahead and get our train installed. So the first thing we want to install is our barrel. So I like to lubricate the pivots of the barrel before they go into the watch. So we use some HP 1300, and we don't need a huge amount here. In fact, we don't need a huge amount anywhere. So we lubricate that bottom pivot and go straight in. And we can see that when we do this, we get lubricant exactly where we want it, and we don't get it anywhere that we don't want it. So you would think that next, maybe we would install the center wheel. Well, that isn't the case, because we have a wheel. No, sorry, we do install the center wheel next. Getting my watches confused again. So the next wheel we'll install is the center wheel. Now the center wheel we're going to lubricate afterward because we have a jewel there. So we'll put our center wheel in place like so. Now that's our new center wheel. Then we're going to put our fourth wheel in place. And then we put our third wheel in place afterward, because our fourth wheel goes there. And then our third wheel goes there. But before we actually put those wheels in place, we're going to install our barrel bridge. Now the reason we're going to install our barrel bridge is because we have our center wheel jewel in our barrel bridge. And if we put our wheel here, it's going to affect our center wheel. So we put our center wheel barrel bridge on. Again, I like to lubricate my top pivot of my arbor first, so that when it goes on, the lubricant is where it should be and not where it shouldn't, because we don't want any lubricant on the square there. So let's go ahead and install our barrel bridge. We can assemble our 3 barrel bridge screws that we need. We just lightly screw down with light pressure to start with. And then we go back and we torque them up a quarter turn. Now, as we do this, we can check our end shakes in our barrel. End shake's good. Minimal bit there. Now remember, we have a new hour wheel, so we're assuming the proportions are correct. Never assume, always check. So I check the end shake, and we can also check it for flatness and concentricity. So we look good. The one thing I'm going to do now too is lubricate our click. I actually forgot to take it out. when I cleaned the movement, so that was my mistake. But now we need to take it off and lubricate it. So I like to put some HP 1300 on the post there of the click. And then where the actual spring meets the click, I like to put some 9504, the blue grease. The blue grease that Omega got me onto, that I'm quite enjoying these days. So just a small dab of (9504) on the back of that spring there. Okay, now we can get to doing our train. So what we'll do is we'll put our escape wheel in. Then we'll do our fourth wheel. And then we'll do our third wheel. Now it's a bit of a tricky train. Oh, there's a little hair in there. A bit of a tricky train, the Omega 5 series. The 5XX series. Because this fourth wheel doesn't really like to stay in place all that well. So it kind of sits there, but it doesn't really stay in place very well. So what we like to do is as best we can. So we get our bridge ready. We check our jewels for cleanliness. So important because we still have a piece of pegwood from cleaning that's stuck inside that jewel there. So we need to go ahead and get that out. That highlights why it's so important to constantly be checking your work. Constantly making sure that everything is up to par. Everything is good. Everything is okay. Because it goes to show okay. Looks like we've got it out. But we're going to clean that bridge again. So I'm going to clean that bridge and I'll be back. So I've re-cleaned the bridge and we're going to put the bridge back in. We're going to put the bridge on now. So that'll be our next step to make sure that our train is nice and secure. So we're going to go ahead and we're going to do that. Now we put it on and we tap the side of the movement holder. It's a good trick. What it does is it helps all our pivots to fall into place. It's a little trick I learned at school. course, doesn't seem to be working today. So we'll do it the old school way. Now we need to look for our jewels for the train. Looks like one. Sorry, our screws for the train, not our jewels. So, we now have our gear train in place. Now what we want to do is we want to check our end shakes. We checked them previously. But it's important that we check them again. And now we can install our ratchet wheel. And look for our ratchet wheel screw. Screw down our ratchet wheel screw. And tighten that up. At this point, we will put on our crown wheel. Now, our crown wheel was quite rusted, if you remember. Actually, our ratchet wheel was too. And we've managed to de-rust and get all that surface rust off our crown wheel. Still have a few little black marks here, but we aren't going to bother changing that out for a new piece. It's not needed. So we're going to lubricate our crown wheel now. And for this, I'm going to use some 9504 metal to metal grease that we'll be using. in a few spots. And we'll just check our freedom by turning that screw there, and everything is good. Our gear train looks good too. So at this point, we're going to turn the movement over, and we're going to assemble our winding and setting work for our hands, and that way we can wind up the watch and get power to it. So the first thing we're going to do is lubricate our center wheel. I may have to do this off camera. And then we'll lubricate our third wheel with a bit of HP 1300. Then we'll lubricate our fourth wheel with 9010. And then we'll lubricate our escape wheel. And we'll also lubricate and install our cannon pinion at this point. And we can press our cannon pinion on, like so. Now, we want to lubricate the post of our minute wheel as the power comes around. And we use HP 1300 for this as well, and then lubricate the post of our small setting wheel. So at this point, we'll put the minute wheel in place, and we'll get our winding pinion. Come out of the cleaner, but not too happy with that. I'm going to do a further little bit of rust removal on there just to get that exactly how I want it. So our sliding pinion is fine, but we're going to do a little bit more rust removal, surface rust removal on that winding pinion. So we'll do that and come back. All right, so I removed all the rust from that component. It's looking much better now and able to be salvaged. Again, it was just surface stuff, but if we obviously leave that on there, it's gonna negate the whole watch service. I mean, it's gonna be completely pointless. So we need to make sure that we get that off. There'll be a few other components too that I believe we need to get some rust off. So we're going to go ahead now and that was the other component we need to get rust off. That setting lever spring there. That yoke spring. So we'll get the rust off that. What we'll do before we do that is we'll go ahead and we'll assemble this section. So for our winding pinion, sliding pinion, we use some 9504, that blue metal to metal grease, and we lubricate all the clutch teeth. All the Breguet teeth, as they're more affectionately known. And just the outsides here. Like a small spot just at the back there. So we'll go ahead and we'll drop our sliding winding pinion in place. And then we'll drop our sliding pinion in place. And we can finish lubricating that. The shaft for our setting lever. I like to use a bit of HP 1300 there. I find it's a better option personally. Lubricate there, and then we can lubricate our post. We can drop our yoke or return bar in place. So I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to get the rust off this return bar spring. All right, so I've removed the rust from our return bar or yoke spring, and we can now fit that in place. I like to put a little bit of lubricant just on the bearing surface of that spring where it interacts with the return bar. A lot of technical manuals don't actually say to lubricate that point, but I say what's the harm? So now we can actually fit our, well, we have our small intermediate pinion, which we already lubricated, which will fit onto the post. And then we can fit our cover plate or setting lever spring. Couldn't remember the name of it there for a second. So we put that in our in place, and then we can fit our screws. Now we see that our yoke, our cover plate or setting lever spring is actually up on top of where it needs to be. So that's not going to act on the pip there. So I like to lubricate it at this point. We need to get some 9504 across the face of our spring there so that the spring can move into the correct positions. So I like to just coat the surface. Coat the surface, and then we can pull the bar back and pull it into place. And we have our winding and setting work fit. And we've lubricated the train wheel pivots on this side of the watch too. So now what we can do is we can fit our winding stem. And we need to lubricate the stem. We'll do this with HP 1300. We will put a small piece wherever there's contact. We'll put it in the slot. Put it on the surface for the sliding pinion. We'll put a dob or a dot on each square or each flat surface of the stem on the square, and we will put it on the pivot as well. And we can then insert and press down our setting lever, and we'll be able to insert it the whole way, like so. And we can see we wind the train, and we can pull it out, and we can set the hands. Now, when we set the hands right now, there's going to be no friction. But it should turn that train. So clearly we don't have enough friction on our cannon pinion. And that's something that we're going to have to increase. So at this point, what we'll do is we'll lubricate the gear train. And we'll use 90-10. For our fast-moving gears. And HP 1300 for our slow-moving gears. Now at this point, we can put our center seconds pinion in place. And we'll just put a little bit of light lubricant on our bushing. And then we fit that into place. Now what we'll do is we'll take our friction springs, there's a box of them around here somewhere. Here we go. I have our friction springs. They come in packets of a few. So we'll take that and we'll clean it, and then we can attach that to the watch. Okay, so I went ahead and cleaned that, and I installed the new friction spring there. So that one is seated in place. Now what we're going to do is we're going to put the pallet fork in place. Then we can wind the watch, and we're going to get to lubricating the escapement at that point. And we'll go through escapement lubrication in a little bit once we get there. So we'll just get our components ready. So we'll get our pallet fork. We'll check our pivots again. Already check out the surface of our jewels. They should be good because we checked them earlier. It's just important to make sure that all those bearing surfaces are in the best condition possible. So we'll put our pallet fork in place. Screws in. Okay, we want to check our end shake on our pallet fork. I'm not happy with that. It's a bit big. I actually think we talked about that in the dismantling process. So I'm going to remove that, and I'm going to adjust that end shake. So when it comes to adjusting end shakes, our weapon of choice is the Horrier tool. The Horrier tool is very simple. It has a micrometric measurement here. We push it down, we turn, and it slowly moves. And we have a pump pusher here into our receiving stake here. End shakes generally, the barrel is usually a small end shake on the bridge, and then the center wheel is a bit bigger, and then we go down progressively smaller on the gear train. So our pallet fork wants to be relatively small in comparison with our gear train, and that's not the case with our watch here. So we set it up like so, and then we press down our end shake to tighten it up. Obviously we don't want to press too far, because if we press too far we're going to press it out. So I've pressed too far here. And I'll press back. So now we'll clean the component and we'll check again. Okay, so we have that end shake adjusted now, and we've got the pallet fork back in its place, and our end shake is now more acceptable. So what we're going to do is we're going to put some power through the watch and fully wind the gear train. And then we're going to head over to the microscope and we're going to lubricate the escapement. So I wasn't actually able to show the escapement being lubricated, but here we can see the effects after lubrication. So we can see that we have a small amount of lubricant, 9415, on the back of our escape wheel tooth. It's not on the tops of the teeth, it's not on the tops of the pallet, it's on the bearing surfaces of the pallet and the bearing surfaces of the teeth as well. Well, I was about to install the balance and then I went through and found all the remaining components that we needed to clean. And I found these 6 screws here. Now these 6 screws still have rust present on them. So we're going to try and save these screws. Our screw heads look relatively okay. It's just the bottoms of the screws. So we're going to go ahead and clean the rust off those, off the bottoms. And then we can fit the balance, because one of the screws we need is actually the screw for the balance cock. So we'll go ahead and I'll get those screws cleaned up. So here's a few of the screws that we cleaned up. They all cleaned up really well. A few extras over here. I can't remember now which ones were which. I think it's this one. So we're really happy with how they cleaned up. All the rust came off those. So what we're going to do now at this point is we're going to put our balance in place. So we'll get our screw ready for that. And we'll install our balance and balance cock. I'm just gonna put some power on the rest of the watch so we get the thing fully wound. It's just easy to do off camera. Now we need to make sure that our pallet fork is to the correct side so that our impulse pin can act with that. So we've done that. Now we take our pallet, we take our balance cock, put it under our train wheel, put the bottom pivot in place, and turn our movement holder. And we have life. We can see that we're ticking away nicely here. So what we're going to do is I'm going to take a close look at that balance. I'm going to make sure that we're breathing nicely between the curb pins, and then we're going to wait a few minutes and we're going to put it on the timing machine to check our initial results. There's one very important thing I forgot to mention, and that's demagnetizing the watch before we check. Now I use the Elmer anti-mag. It's a one-touch thing. Press the button like so, sends a pulse through, and it demagnetizes the movement completely. Just like that. There are others that are a style where you pull them away. You can buy cheap demagnetizers on the internet, but this is one of the best demagnetizers you can buy here, this Elmer, and I find it works the best. But you can use other styles that pull the movement away out of the field as well. So here we have our initial results on the timing machine. We can see that we have amplitude of around 243, 245. We're gaining time, which is fine. We need to regulate that down. And we have our lift angle set to 49, which is the correct lift angle for this movement. So pretty respectable results initially with having just serviced the watch. So what we'll do is we'll come back to this watch and after 24 hours and see what kind of timing results we come up with then. So about 12 hours has gone by now. And we can see that our amplitude has climbed once the watch has started to settle in. Lubrication started to settle in and things like that. So we can see that our amplitude is up to a respectable 280 now. Obviously we're still gaining, but we haven't regulated the watch down yet. So very nice numbers that we're seeing at this point for a serviced watch. Again, I'm not going to go through timing results here, positional error and things, because we're going to do that on a separate video where we can really focus in on amplitude. We're going to focus in on positional error, timing in different positions, amplitude drops in vertical positions, and it's just all too much to go through on this video here. So please join me for the next video where we're going to go through that, which is going to specifically cover timing tolerances and things of this actual movement. So we're going to time this movement and see what positional error we can get out of it and what kind of results we can get. So we're going to end the video there. We aren't going to assemble the automatic work. I'm actually waiting for a recycled automatic winding wheel to arrive. I decided to change that component out, and you send the old one into Omega and they send you back a recycled one. So we're going to wait for that to arrive, and also we're not going to case the watch up because we went through the uncasing process. So you've seen all the dial and hands and all that kind of thing. So hopefully you get a good idea now of what goes on when we service an Omega 551, parts we have to change and things like that. So thanks a lot for watching, guys. Please subscribe to the channel if you want to see more content like this. Please follow along. Like the video, and also follow along on Instagram, and you can check out my website, precisionhorology.com. So thanks for watching, guys, and we'll see you next time.